And welcome on in to the latest edition of the Blue Horseshoe podcast. He is George Bremer. I am Ryan Hicke. Game week or almost game. No, it is game week, I should say, but I was saying almost game day, George. Holy cow, we're off to a hot start here on Thursday. Midseason form. Ravens 2-0. Colts 1-1 coming off their win over the Texans. Could be a very interesting game here. We will have you covered from the Ravens perspective in a little bit. Jonas, Shaffer of Baltimore Banner will join us to go behind enemy lines to kind of give us a Ravens perspective, what to expect. Another banged up team, George. The Ravens are kind of like the Texans last week, where offensively, defensively, a lot of injuries could impact the way this game is played. Some wet weather as well expected in Baltimore could impact the game as well. But obviously the biggest thing that will impact this game, George, right, from the Colts perspective, is who is under center. Anthony Richardson still in concussion protocol, or Gardner Minshew, who did step in nicely in Houston in relief. Now, we're recording this on Thursday morning. As of the moment we're recording this, Anthony Richardson was at practice Wednesday, did not participate. He's in the red jersey, but was not a participant in practice. He was there, at least, which is a good sign. But obviously, George, we kind of talked about this on Tuesday, but just to read it before we go any further in this, this is we expect at least a decision for Anthony Richardson of who, if he's going to be cleared or not. The earliest, fair to say, we expect a decision is probably Saturday in terms of if he'll be ready to go or if he'll be out.
Probably. If he's out, you might get it a little bit earlier. There's a possibility that would come Friday, but if he's going to play, that probably will wait till Saturday. I mean, we talked about it. You can go back and check the Tuesday pod. You've got to clear that independent neurologist, and that usually happens on Saturday. So that's the last step of the 5 to get through here. Again, every one of these cases is unique. Every one of these players, the way they recover is unique. So it's hard to really put any kind of idea or timetable on it. But from the Colts standpoint, they've been cautious and kind of just really patient this week. I think that's going to continue. Obviously, by the time a lot of people are listening to this, they'll know whether or not Richardson practiced Thursday. But even that is not going to be a definitive kind of a statement here. If he's out there, it's obviously trending in the right direction. If he's not, there are ways to pass the protocol just playing Friday or practicing Friday and going through a contact test on Saturday. So not ideal. Don't know how much you want to do that with a rookie, especially in wet weather in a hostile environment. But it's still, they're all options still on the table for the Colts.
And right. And like I said, especially if he's practicing in full on Friday, let's just say, does not guarantee anything in terms of his status on Sunday. So, well, obviously you're going to wait and see on his status. Looks to be up in the air for most of the week, and we will not, for the most part, get a definitive answer. But either way, George, I'm not trying to minimize the quarterback position. All right, I'm not stupid, and the listeners, I'm not thinking you're stupid by saying this. I'm not trying to insult your intelligence by trying to minimize how important the quarterback position is. But whether it is Minshew or whether it is Richardson on Sunday, George, I don't think it matters, because for me, the biggest key is going to be, obviously, this offensive line. Can you get a push against this Ravens defensive line? But also, too, look, the weather may impact what I'm about to say, so maybe this is not going to be as much of a factor. But you look at this Ravens secondary and how banged up there. And again, we'll have Jonas Shaffer on in a little bit here to give us, true health update. But it looks like Marlon Humphrey, at least from our 10,000 foot perspective, is not going to play. Missed the Ravens' first 2 games of the season with a foot injury. He's their best defensive back. They have put another defensive back on IR. Their other defensive back is hurt or safety did not play as well. Like, the Ravens are depleted in the secondary. This has to be a game where if you're throwing the ball even a little bit, you got to have Michael Pittman. You got to have Alec Pierce. Even whether it's any one of the tight ends, someone's got to step up here, George. I know last week against the Texans, a little bit more of a committee role where the ball was spread out a ton and no one really had a big day. In Baltimore against a tough physical defense, someone's got to make a play here. Like, if it's not going to be now, again, weather permitting, it's going to be never for this skill group. Someone here has to step up and be a playmaker for this offense.
Yeah, absolutely. We talked about that going into last week's game too. And I think for one of the many reasons it was disappointing to see Richardson leave that game so early is that we didn't really get a good look at what that might have looked like against a banged up Houston secondary. I know there's a clip going around social media that was pretty viral where, Alec Pierce was open and Richardson just didn't get to that progression and didn't make the throw. But, that's one That's one snap. It would have been really interesting to see because it felt like the way that game started, it was going to be a big day for Richardson. And you never know. I mean, maybe if he plays the last 3 quarters, that first quarter was the best of the bunch. And, but going into that game, I think there was a lot of speculation on our part about whether or not they could take advantage of a banged up secondary. And then you just really didn't find out. That's where I do think the quarterback situation and the weather uh, is important this week because I think it's more likely that Richardson will take deep shots. It's just not really Minshew's game. He obviously is more likely to get through all of his reads. So maybe in that regard, he's more likely to take a deep shot. But you saw it on Sunday. That's who he is. He's going to be get the ball out fast, move the ball efficiently, don't put it in harm's way. That's Gardner Minshew's game. That's how when he had success with the Jaguars as a rookie, that's how he played then. It's how he plays now. But with Richardson, we've seen it in practice. You see it on his college tape. He will take those deep shots and he throws a really, really good deep ball. So if he plays and the weather's cooperative to it, this would seem to be another game where, on paper, there's a chance to dial some of those up.
If the weather is nice, right? Again, that could also impact what we're talking about here in a second, at least in terms of skill guys stepping up. But it's like, you look like, probably the best corner maybe for Baltimore on Sunday is going to be Rock Ya-Sin. We've seen Rock Ya-Sin. Outside of a lot of grabbing, a lot of holding, a lot of pass interference calls, it's not like he's Revis Island 2.0 here. Like if it's advantageous for passing the ball, George, this has to be a game where if you're Michael Pittman Jr., you're open consistently. You're like 7-11, always open, especially if it is Gardner Minshew at quarterback, where you said he is more of a quick thrower, but he's a guy who reads the field well. You got to be getting open here. And you got to be getting open consistently. Because again, with these injuries, if you're not getting open against second and third stringers, and you're Michael Pittman Jr., you want to get paid, tough to make that case. If you're Alec Pierce, like I said, look, he was open last week, wide open, and missed by Anthony Richardson. That's going to happen. But you know what? Also get open more consistently. Like that's been, I think, an overall theme for the Colts receivers, especially for the first 2 weeks, is not getting consistently open. One play, sure, you can get open. But if that's the only time you get open, George, you're not doing yourself or your quarterback, especially, any favors, whether it's Anthony Richardson or if it's Gardner Minshew.
Yeah, and take advantage of it when it is there. I think that's one thing through the first couple of weeks the Colts have not done as well as they probably wish that they would, is to take advantage of the big play opportunities when they do present themselves. And that's tough. I think it's something with a young quarterback that takes a while to come because, that ability to kind of be at your best in the biggest moments is what separates the quarterbacks in this league. Taking advantage of that one moment the defense gives you of weakness is, what honestly, it's one of the biggest differences between like Patrick Mahomes and Ryan Tannehill. Is
You're right
just
about that.
knowing when and not just knowing it, being able to execute in that moment and make that big play. It's just the windows, the margins are just so tight in this league that it really does just come down to those 3 or 4 chances you got. Did you deliver? And the young quarterbacks take a little while to kind of learn that. And I think it's a process. And that again is where it's disappointing, that Richardson wasn't able to finish the game because obviously you want him out there as much as you can. You want to give him as many reps as you can. But now this week, you got to be extra cautious with him because as much as, yes, get him out there and go through that process and get him that much closer, taking advantage of those 3 or 4 moments. You also don't want to do anything at any point in his career, but especially at this point in his career, that could have a long-term effect on it, and have a situation here where a bad situation becomes even worse. So I think the Colts are going to be smart about it. They've been historically really careful with these cases with concussions. I don't think there's any reason for them to change that approach here. And there's no indication that they're going to, but there's a lot. I mean, there's so many storylines coming into this game just in Richardson alone. There's so much here, the balance, the risk reward here, should you get him out there and get him an opportunity in a really tough environment against a really good defense to go out there and, get more reps, or are you better off letting him take this week off and come back next week at home against the Rams, hopefully 100%. We'll see. I also wonder how much Ryan Kelly's situation plays into this. We don't know where he's at in the protocol, progressing well from Shane Steichen. That was a shocking statement on Wednesday. Didn't see that one coming. But the fact that your starting center might not play, does that impact the coaching staff's decision on Richardson? We'll see.
I know it's always tough because, again, concussions are very ambiguous, but at least in the sense of Ryan Kelly, I don't think it's a good sign for him playing on Sunday for the fact that he just wasn't visible at practice, right? Neither him nor Richardson participated in practice on Wednesday, but Richardson was at least present. He was on the field. He was in the locker room. He was around the team, which, again, everyone's different. But you just would think on the surface that would indicate Richardson is progressing well, as Steichen would say, to steal a line from him, and doing better than Ryan Kelly if Kelly wasn't even at practice and even just visible around the team, which, again, George, we talked about on Tuesday's pod, but now especially since we know that Richardson nor Kelly practiced on Wednesday, I just don't see the benefit or the upside of playing Richardson on Sunday, especially when you look at the weather, where, again, we believe it should be wet and it should be a good amount of rain in Baltimore, which would mean more running, right? And more running would mean you would run your quarterback if he's out there, and Richardson more, which he ran 10 times in week number 1, ran 3 times in his limited time in 4 drives in week number 2. You would think he's going to get a good amount of carries then in week 3 at the Ravens. So you're going to put the ball in his hands a good amount. He's going to be running. He's coming off a concussion, George, with your center most likely, we believe, I'm going to say at least right now as we record this on Thursday, most likely not going to play. I just don't see the benefit, George. I don't see how, in a guy who made 2 career starts with so much still ahead of him, how it makes sense, and it's more of a benefit to play him in week number 3 than is a detriment to sit him for 1 game. To me, at this point, makes too much sense to have him sit back, let Minshew run the ship for a week, and have him come back for a week, hopefully week number 4, healthy and ready to go fully.
We've said since before the draft, when we didn't even know who the quarterback was going to be, that the primary, goal for this season should be developing whoever that quarterback is. And certainly once it was Richardson, we've said repeatedly, he's the most important aspect of this season. Developing him, getting him at the end of the year to where you feel really good about, who he is as a player. And so far, all signs have been incredibly positive. You can make an argument he's been the best of the rookie quarterbacks so far, even with him not playing very much in week 2. But I do think, in this case, you can make a really strong argument that it's better for his development not to play. I know that normally that's not the case, get him out there, get the reps, but you could make a case right now that it's better for his development to watch Gardner Minshew run this offense from the sideline and to heal and be, more full go, because development's not just experience. It's not just getting those reps on the field. It's doing everything, every aspect of him as a player and a person, improving all of it, putting him in the best place going forward. And you make a really strong argument that the best place for him going forward this week is the sideline.
I like the line of development is not just getting experience, because I think you're right. Because also, too, if you look at the game plan, right, if what we think is going to happen in the sense that's going to be a wet day and you're probably going to miss your center, again, that would lead on the surface to think, well, okay, they got no Jonathan Taylor in the backfield, which means, look, Zach Moss had a good week 2, but again, we're talking about a guy with 18 carries for 88 yards, not exactly Walter Payton. So if you're going to exploit the run game and rely on the run game a lot, you're going to do it with multiple runners. And you're going to do it with, right now, the best runner on your team, which is Anthony Richardson. Is it really beneficial with a guy coming off a concussion, George, to run him 10 times in a wet and slippery field? I don't think that helps his development. Like, to your point, it's not just about experience on the field. It's game plan as well. If the Colts want Richardson and really are going to try to develop him to be kind of like what the Ravens are doing right now with Lamar Jackson, where it is more of a pocket guy, like, you're going to use your legs, obviously, but they don't want him to be a 50-50 run half the time, pass half the time. If they want it to be, let's just say, an 80-20 balance, where you're still having Richardson throw the ball a majority of the time, a large part of the time for the Colts have success, and then when he has to run or call a few runs here and there sprinkled in, okay, fine, keep the defense honest. If that's what the Colts and Shane Steichen ultimately want Richardson to be, then having him run the ball, or missing a game, I should say, where he runs the ball primarily and is not much of a passer, and because of the conditions, I don't think it's the worst thing in the world whatsoever and hurts his development whatsoever.
No, and that's important. I also think it's important to note with Richardson, his natural inclination is to be a thrower. I think as dangerous as
Right.
he is with his legs, he stands in the pocket. He maneuvers in the pocket really well. He's looking downfield. He wants to throw more than he wants to run, and so I think that's another thing. Where does that work against him a little bit in this kind of environment? Will he on the plays where it's up to him? Will he decide to throw in maybe poor conditions instead of taking off and running? I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see. That to me, though, is one of the ironies of the fact that he hasn't finished those first two games. You go back and you look at his Florida tape and you look at the way he played in the preseason, what he's done in practice. This is a guy who wants to play from the pocket, not necessarily play from the pocket, wants to be more of a passer than a runner. He wants to be known for his ability to throw the football. And he wants to make big plays, big explosive plays, through the air. So it's just ironic that he's been banged up on a couple of runs early on. But you look at the league, the history of this league, whether it's Michael Vick, any of the guys, Randall Cunningham, who were primarily known as for what they did with their legs, younger, the ones that lasted, the ones that had longer careers, transitioned into more of a passing quarterback. You see Baltimore kind of working on that with Lamar Jackson now. I don't think it's going to be a tough transition for Richardson. I think it's something that he prefers anyway.
Right. I'm with you there. I'm 100% with you there. Like I said, you watch the Florida tape. It is him if he's rolling out and escaping the pocket, it's still keeping his eyes down the field and trying to throw first instead of kind of frankly being like Justin Fields, where we've seen in Chicago, where it's one read. Oh, it's not there. Let me tuck it and run it and look to make a play with my legs. Richardson has been a guy where it feels like when it's not a designed run call, right, has been a guy that says, okay, I'll run if I have to. But if the pass is there, I'm going to make the pass. And like I said, with Lamar Jackson, another example of a guy who is elite dual threat capabilities that now has not been able to finish seasons. And they said, you know what, we're going to make you more of a pocket passer and cut down on the runs. We'll get into a little bit more of that, of the Ravens offense and what Lamar's transition is looking like with Jonas Shaffer when he joins us here in a little bit. Kind of talk about that. But we talked obviously a lot about the offense, George, for the Colts, and obviously depending on who is quarterback, Richardson or Minshew. But either way, it looks, because of the weather, it looks to be more of a ground and pound game, which also brings up the question, George. Look, Zach Moss obviously was a huge beacon of light in week number 2. And again, had a really solid game, 88 yards, 18 carries, and a score. But also, if this is going to be a game where it is going to be mostly on the ground because of the rain, also, George, they can't rely on then one running back to handle a majority of the carries, especially either way, if Richardson's in or not, because you want to limit his, again, limit the amount of hits he takes. But especially if it's Minshew and there's no threat of the quarterback run. I mean, right now, if Zach Moss needs a blow and they got to get a second running back in there, I mean, is it crazy to say Trey Sermon, who they just signed, George, is going to be like RB2 for this weekend? Like, who the hell? It's a guess right now, but who the hell was running the ball if it's not Zach Moss on Sunday?
I mean, RB2 for the one snap last week was Isaiah McKenzie. I mean, that tells you a lot about where they're at,
Holy cow.
in this depth chart. And you see the fact that they brought Tyler Goodson in 2 weeks ago. They brought in Trey Sermon this week. They're obviously still trying to work things through at that position. Could Sermon be called up on game day and be, that second back? Certainly. He knows Shane Steichen's offense. He was there in Philly with him for a little while. So I think that's, that gives him a little bit of an advantage. He's played in this scheme before. Is he going to get 25 carries? No. But I think it's important to get, like you said, to get that rest. I mean, you go back to Edgerrin James, who was playing in a different era. He wasn't taking 56 out of 57 offensive snaps. I mean, that is an insane number, and it's not sustainable, especially for a guy like Zach Moss, who's more of a tank, a very physical running back who's going to run to contact, who's going to be in even more collisions than maybe the average running back's going to be. If they wear him down like this, it doesn't lead to good places.
No, it does not. And it's just, again, obviously underscores the lack of depth and also injuries having a part of that too, but also production. Like we're talking about before, if Deion Jackson's fumbling twice and also not running efficiently anyway in week number 1 in a dome with perfect conditions, In the rain in Baltimore, I don't say you can feel confident with him whatsoever. And like you said, the fact that Zach Moss played all but one offensive snap and in terms of rushes from a running back, took every single handoff given to a running back, it shows you the confidence of in Deion Jackson is none, is zero. And again, if you're not giving him one carry in Houston last week, where the conditions were ideal, I don't see how if you're Shane Steichen, you go into week 3 here thinking, all right, if we need Zach Moss to give him a rest and we can't ride him the whole game, which is not, like I said, sustainable or realistic, I don't see Shane Steichen be like, yeah, we feel great about Deion Jackson. We're going to give him 7 carries on Sunday. I think it has to be whether it's Goodson. Even, I mean, honestly, I don't think it's crazy to think Trey Sermon can get a few carries. I think he's more of an explosive back, and even though he's tough, does give you a little bit more breaking ability than Moss. And I mean, honestly, George, not to undermine the complexity of a playbook, but from a running back perspective, can't be that hard to learn a few rushing plays in 3 or 4 days leading into Sunday's game. I think they can make it happen.
Yeah, I mean, you've seen it happen before. I think Kenyon Drake may get called up for Baltimore. So, I mean, it could be on both sides of that in that regard. Running backs can come in and have an impact pretty quickly as long as they're in condition, as long as they get their football legs under them. And yeah, I don't know the lack of trust that this team has in the backup running backs is pretty plainly obvious on Sunday, just from the number of carries that Zach Moss got coming himself off a long layoff. And we were talking on the last pod or last week, well, if he does play, is he going to get the full load? No way. We thought he was going to have, every carry by a running back. That wasn't even in anywhere in my mind. And I know it wasn't in yours either. So it just tells you, that Deion Jackson, Jake Funk, they're not feeling real confident in those two. So yeah, I mean, could Trey Sermon be worked in? Could Tyler Goodson be worked in? It's very possible. And I think it's almost necessary because again, this is not sustainable, and it's not something you don't want to run Zach Moss into the ground because, as you've seen, the other alternatives are not really ideal.
We'll get to Jonas Shaffer of Baltimore Banner in 1 second, but last thing I want to throw out there is this. Like you mentioned, both teams right now, the Ravens and the Colts, are working with second and third string running backs, right? No J.K. Dobbins for the Ravens, obviously no Jonathan Taylor for the Colts. It looks like Justice Hill, the primary backup for Baltimore, could miss the game on Sunday. And obviously for the Colts, right now we're talking about Zach Moss and no one else. So it's Gus Edwards for the Ravens, Moss for the Colts, and question marks everywhere else on both sides running back depth-wise. This is going to come down to the offensive lines. And if you're the Colts, I know it looks like Ryan Kelly probably won't play. Still a chance, but probably won't play, let's just say, err on the side of caution. But if you're the Ravens, they're missing their center, Tyler Linderbaum. They're missing their left tackle, Ronnie Stanley. This, again, and the Colts have been an elite run team so far, at least in terms of blocking the first 2 weeks. The rushing sacks, especially week 1, won't back that up. But blocking-wise, analytically, they've been a great rush blocking team. This favors on Sunday, George, the Colts offensive line performing better than right now the Ravens offensive line.
Yeah, I mean, I think the number 2 storyline that we were talking about coming into this year, number 1 was the quarterback. We talked about that several times. And number 2 was the offensive line. Can they bounce back? Really good signs from them in the first 2 weeks. Now, playing a full game without Ryan Kelly, we'll test that. There's no question. And we've been worried about the depth on offensive line. That's been a topic of conversation for a long time. So that'll be something to watch definitely on Sunday. But I think the early indications are really positive with this offensive line having a bounce back season. And I think Tony Sparano Jr. deserves a lot of credit for that.
He does. He absolutely does. And like you said, Wesley French deserves a lot of credit for coming in the second half and performing well in place of Ryan Kelly. Now, a little bit different test, Houston's defensive line versus Baltimore's defensive line. But so far early on, nice test pass in week number 2. But like I said, it's going to be a whole different challenge here in week number 3 if Ryan Kelly cannot go. We'll give you our game picks here in a little bit. Not to brag, George. We are hot. 2-0 to start the year. New year, new us when it comes to picks. We'll see if we can go 3-0 and give you our picks as the Ravens are favored by 7.5 points on Sunday's matchup. But when we return, time to go behind enemy lines, talk about this Ravens rush attack, talk about Lamar Jackson's new style of play, and talk about the Ravens secondary. banged up. We'll do so with Jonas Shaffer of Baltimore Banner when the Blue Horseshoe Pod returns. All right, time to go behind enemy lines. We do welcome in Jonas Shaffer. Does a great job covering the Ravens for Baltimore Banner. Jonas, appreciate you giving us a few minutes here on the Blue Horseshoe Podcast. Let's start with this because we've heard a lot of changes with the Ravens this offseason where they change offense coordinators, now bringing Todd Monken, I should say spend a lot of resources in the offseason and the draft of free agency, bringing in different wide receivers. There's a concerted effort, right, to make Lamar Jackson, I guess, more of a passer. So we've seen it through a little bit through 2 games here, but going into week 3 here, should Colts fans expect Lamar Jackson to be more of a pocket passer than maybe the usual dual threat quarterback we've seen him before?
Yeah, I think that's a fair expectation. I think when Monken was hired and when they made these investments at wide receiver, not to poke at a scab for Colts fans, but I think there was this expectation that every Sunday would look like that Ravens comeback win over the Colts 2 years ago in prime time, where he was just lighting up the Colts. He was dropping back to pass every single time. It was a 3-step drop, 5-step drop, boom. He would get the ball out. They've been pretty balanced on offense so far, but it has been interesting to your point about the dual threat nature of him. There hasn't been a whole lot of read option stuff. They've used that when they've had to, but for the most part, he's done his damage with his legs as a scrambler when he's just had to, make that second play, when he's had to get outside of structure because the first read isn't there, the second read isn't there, and it's Lamar time. He's got to go and do his thing. So I think there is a concerted effort to get him more comfortable in the passing game, and with that comes more reps as a drop back passer. So far, at least, there have been fewer read option stuff. Maybe they're kind of holding that for the bigger games, the playoffs, where he's a little bit more vulnerable, where, those injury concerns are a little bit more exposed when you're putting yourself out there, getting possibility of rammed by 280-pound defensive ends. But he's looked more like a conventional quarterback. And I think that's something that Ravens fans have long dreamed of.
One thing that I'm kind of wondering about is, the Ravens offensive line is a little bit banged up, or it has been so far. And I know the injury report on Wednesday still reflects that. The Colts defensive line's probably been the strength of the team so far. Just from the Baltimore perspective, what does that defensive line look like, and what are they expecting on Sunday?
Yeah, I mean, I think with how bad the initial injuries to Ronnie Stanley, their left tackle, and Tyler Linderbaum looked, it was probably a bit of a relief to Ravens fans not to see them go on IR. As you said, they didn't practice on Wednesday, and it's probably tough to imagine them getting ready in a matter of a couple of days for that game against Indianapolis on Sunday. It's a sprain for both of them, a knee sprain and an ankle sprain, so not a minor injury in the least. But you're right. I think Indianapolis on paper should have the advantage there in the run game. But I thought that would also be the case against Cincinnati, which obviously has a couple great edge setters there, and Hendrickson and Hubbard, and DJ Reader is one of the best nose tackles in the NFL. And they ended up rolling for 170, 180 rushing yards. Obviously, like 50 of which came on scrambles from Lamar, or 40 of which something thereabouts. So it's tough to say exactly where they stand, but just looking at the metrics for Indianapolis and that run defense is super impressive. I mean, we have access to true media, and I think the Colts are averaging like 0.5 yards before contact on run plays, which is absurd. The only team that's better than you guys is the Browns, which is in the negatives, which is incredible considering just how god awful they were last year. But it's a really fun, athletic run defense. I mean, John Harbaugh was raving about the linebackers. They really liked Grover Stewart coming out of the draft, apparently. So I think if Indianapolis can win the battle there and force the Ravens into a lot in third and longs where they can dial up some pressure packages, and that's where Lamar Jackson can really struggle. So that's going to be a really fun battle to monitor on Sunday.
George just mentioned the injuries on the offensive line, Jonas, but you look in the secondary too for Baltimore, another banged up position group. Marlon Humphrey, Marcus Williams, both didn't play on Sunday, both didn't practice at least on Wednesday. You had our Darius Washington as well going on IR. So there's a lot of bodies missing right now from that secondary. I don't know if you have any plays left in you on Sunday, if the Ravens might call you up, but who could Colts fans be seeing in this secondary on Sunday?
Yeah, I mean, it's just like with the Colts secondary, it's a lot of no names, at least at that cornerback spot. Kyle Hamilton is obviously a pretty well-known safety at this point, with him being a stud at Notre Dame and first-round pick last year, who really flashed. But he, is playing more as a deep safety this year. He was basically their go-to slot guy last year. That's changed. But next to him is Geno Stone, who had that really, really impressive red zone pick on Joe Burrow on Sunday. But when you get to the cornerbacks, it's a bit of a mix of guys who are either young or unproven or coming back from injury. It's probably going to be, I would imagine Brandon Stevens is their main option to cover someone like Michael Pittman, just because of his strength, speed, athletic profile. He was a guy who was, at least on plan, was to transition him to safety this training camp, and then he's always had that versatility. So they knocked him back to cornerback when his injuries started popping up. I don't think we'll see Marlon Humphrey, because again, he was not out there practicing on Wednesday. On the other corner, it's probably going to be former Colt Rockestein mixed with a little bit of Ronald Darby, who's less than a year removed from an ACL injury that knocked him out of that Denver Broncos season. With our Darius Washington gone, it's probably going to be Arthur Mollett, who was the Steelers' primary slot cornerback last year. So it's really a defense that I think has to be better than the sum of its part. They've got a great coordinator in Mike McDonald, and their great run defense means that they don't have to contribute as many bodies as maybe other teams would to that front end to feel secure in the back end. So obviously they did a pretty good job against Joe Burrow and that talented passing core in Cincinnati. And obviously it's a bit of a step down for the Colts, especially if Anthony Richardson can't go. But, you look at the after the catch ability of someone like Michael Pittman, obviously that really impressive catch and run touchdown in week 1. And then, Alec Pierce is a big body who can, go over maybe some of these smaller Ravens cornerbacks if he gets a favorable matchup. So I know they're, very, very respectful of what the Colts have on paper, and they're definitely not going to overlook them. But it's interesting to see where they might be emotionally coming off such a big win on Sunday.
You kind of touched on a little bit. Obviously, quarterback situation here unclear. Don't know if Richardson's going to start or if Minshew's going to. But historically, everybody talks about New England and what kind of troubles they cause for rookie quarterbacks. Is Baltimore underrated in that? Do they get enough credit? I mean, I feel like they throw so many different looks. It seems to me that the Ravens might be, if the Patriots are the number one team a rookie quarterback doesn't want to face, the Ravens might be 1A.
Yeah, the numbers for rookie quarterbacks, especially in Baltimore, are not good. This is kind of top of mind because CJ Stroud is just 2 weeks off coming off a trip to Baltimore. So did a lot of research. I think the numbers are something like 2-15 for rookie quarterbacks in Baltimore. Efficiency wise, they are basically worse than Colt McCoy, 2022 Colt McCoy on average. So it's not pretty. They throw a lot of picks. They're sacked a lot. Efficiency wise, they're just absolutely terrible. But there's not a lot of rookie quarterbacks, or there's never been a rookie quarterback who's built like Anthony Richardson. And I think it was maybe a surprise to me, at least, to see that Colts offensive line after what was a pretty troubling last year. See PFF have them, I think, number 6 in like their offensive line rankings going into this week. Obviously, with Kelly and maybe Nelson out, that would definitely take a hit. But I think a big problem for a lot of these rookie quarterbacks is they don't have great offensive lines. And if Indianapolis is healthy and if it has the, kind of defense mitigating force that is Anthony Richardson, then it might not matter as much. And Anthony Richardson might have a real shot of coming out of Baltimore with a win, again, if he's healthy enough to play.
Whether it is Richardson, whether it is Minshew, Jonas, what's the biggest challenge going against this Ravens defense, you think, in week 3?
I think it probably is just, can you make this Ravens defense commit enough numbers to the run game that, they are vulnerable in the back end? That this is a Ravens defense that is fine, just, playing with light boxes and having those 2 deep safeties, so you have some more security on, those go balls and those corner routes and all the stuff that, modern passing offenses now look for in terms of explosives. But they have 2 great linebackers in Roquan Smith and Patrick Queen. The defensive line is pretty stout, although it looks like they probably will be without Dafe Owe, who's I think probably their top outside linebacker at this point. So you worry about some of the wear and tear there, especially with Jadeveon Clowney's injury history. But this is a group that like in like Indianapolis has a bunch of butt kickers up front, and if they can force Indianapolis into 2nd and 9s and 3rd and 6 just because there's not a lot there, and if they can hustle and rally to the ball and stop some of the screen games and RPOs that Gardner Minshew relied upon a lot last week, and I think they'll feel pretty good. I mean, it was interesting to me just to dig into the stats. I think Gardner Minshew attempted just 4 passes beyond 10 yards on Sunday, and I think the Ravens will be fine if that's the diet that they're going to get in week 3.
Last one for me. I saw Lamar earlier this week kind of brushed off the questions about the last meeting and the comeback. Obviously, that one's going to be remembered in both cities for a while. But he said this is a new week, a new year, and you're moving forward. But does that game, the fact that the Colts came in and pushed them, does it limit the chances? I know you look right now, Baltimore, I think, is 8-point favorites. Does it limit the chances of the Ravens overlooking the Colts in any way this week?
It's a good question. I mean, Lamar's never really been one to focus too much on the past. So if the offense is taking its cue from him, then they don't have to worry too much about what happened back in 2021. And defensively, Roquan Smith was also not on that Ravens defense. And again, he is their spiritual leader. So you don't worry too much about, what might happen there. It's really tough to know what the makeup of this Ravens team is, guys. I mean, like last year, they were really good in a lot of games for 3 quarters, and then come the 4th quarter, they collapsed. And that these past 2 weeks, they've done a pretty good job of holding on. Not, they haven't been elite at just kicking these teams out of the gym, but they've done a pretty good job. And I think Indianapolis, if they don't have Richardson, will probably be not as talented as Houston or definitely Cincinnati. So I think they are in a good place mentally. I think that they have a good coach who knows how to push the right buttons. And I think for a lot of those guys, that primetime game against the Colts was just a fever dream. I mean, so many incredible things happened, from just the horrific start to the blocked kick to the 2-point conversion, I think it was late in that one. So for a lot of these guys, I think it's probably just a memory, and frankly, haven't really heard it brought up too often in the locker room.
Now, it's always kind of a futile effort to project weather going forward, right? Because things change on a dime. But at least right now, Jonas, it looks to be wet in the Baltimore area on Sunday. If the predictions that we're seeing now, at least on Thursday morning, which again is still far away, but if they're true and it is going to be a wet Sunday here, who does that favor in this matchup, you think?
I think if Richardson is available, and probably him, just because I would personally not want to try to tackle a 6'4", 245-pound guy running a 4 for 40 in the rain. That just does not sound all that appealing to me. And this Ravens linebacker crew, Patrick Queen, very fast, very instinctive, but he does have a habit of missing some tackles. The secondary isn't blessed with great size or great tacklers, especially with Marcus Williams out. So you do worry about maybe some athletic deficiencies there. I guess, the Ravens, Lamar has, I believe, struggled in the past throwing in the rain, just like any quarterback would. I don't know how often Richardson might have played in the rain down in the SEC. So I guess it's a little bit of a question mark with him too. But yeah, I think the rain would definitely narrow the talent gap between these teams, just because of maybe some of the strengths that it would amplify and some of the negatives that it would cover up. But again, that's just a shot in the dark. I really don't have a scientific answer for you guys.
And finally, Jonas, Vegas right now has this game as a 7.5-point spread. Ravens, obviously the favorite at home. When it's all said and done, you expecting a Ravens win here by more than a score?
I think probably 6 or 7 is where I would feel comfortable with this one. I mean, I know they've surpassed my expectations score-wise for the first 2 weeks, but I just think with what Indianapolis presents defensively, especially that run defense, and the really impressive scheme that Shane Steichen has been able to put on tape these first 2 weeks, I think explosive plays are definitely on the table for the Colts if they get the Ravens the right matchup. So I think something like 20-14 with maybe a late score from Indianapolis, making it closer than it seems, is what I'm feeling. But again, like a loss would not shock me, considering just where the Ravens were emotionally in the locker room, hooting and hollering after that win in Cincinnati, and again, just the really, really capable hands that Gardner Minshew would bring to the Colts if Anthony Richardson can't go on Sunday.
Jonas Shaffer does a tremendous job covering the Ravens for Baltimore Banner. Jonas, thanks so much for the time here. Enjoy the game on Sunday. If it's raining, stay dry, and appreciate you coming behind enemy lines with us.
Appreciate you guys having me on. Thanks a lot.
Interesting stuff there from Jonas there, George, especially considering, like, look, obviously that was a big win for the Ravens in week 2 against the Bengals. Obviously, right, division rival. You're 2-0. They are the reigning AFC North champs, and obviously they have been one of the gold standards in the AFC. I did not, honestly, going into this game, expect letdown, especially with John Harbaugh being a really good head coach. But Jonas is right that they kind of went all in week 2 in this game, and now you're kind of feeling yourself. Colts have an opportunity here, George, to kind of go in and shock some people.
I mean, that's a huge game for the Ravens. I mean, you look at the recent history between them and the Bengals. I think it was a third time in like a 9-month span that they had played in Cincinnati. The Bengals knocked them out of the playoffs last year. You had all that controversy with the coin toss and, all the things that were going on to determine the division. So
that's right.
It's understandable why that feels like such a huge win on Baltimore's side of the ledger. I mean, Steelers are probably always going to be their number one foe. That's the big rivalry, but the Bengals seem to be like moving into that 1A spot with them, where it's a massive game. And I think anytime you put that much emotion into a contest, naturally, the next one there's a little bit of letdown. It's impossible in this league to be that high for 18 weeks. You just can't do it. But I also wonder, and that's where, the question I asked, the last time they played the Colts, took it to them. And they needed a lot of things to go right. They needed a miraculous comeback. Does that limit the letdown? I don't know. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out, because you would think the way that the Colts defensive line is played, the way the last meeting went, that the Colts would still have their attention. But at the same time, human nature tells you they're not going to be on the same sort of adrenaline rush that they were in Cincinnati.
And you would think, too, whether it's Anthony Richardson, coming off a concussion, and they've already seen a rookie quarterback in C.J. Stroud in week number 1 and made his life hell, or Gardner Minshew, who's been a lifetime backup. Like, again, that's, I think, an easy area if you're the Ravens. Like, we just beat Joe Burrow in his own house with Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, and there's no Jamar Chase on the Colts, and who even knows who their quarterback is, but neither of them are Joe Burrow. Like, I think you're right. I think it's easy if you're Baltimore, just be like, we'll throw our jack traps on the field and we'll win this one and get out of Dodge and go to 3-0. This is a spot where if you're the Colts, I think a fast start here definitely should be to your advantage, right? You think if they are a little bit hungover from that win last week against the Bengals, that a slow start should then happen for the Ravens, which should open the door for the Colts if they're going to be in this game. Start fast, just like you did in Houston. Start fast right away, go down the field, get a touchdown, get a stop on defense, and kind of tell everyone, we are here, George. We are here. And something going in their favor could be the weather. Now, I get it. Look, we're recording this on Thursday morning. The game's on Sunday, right? Like, we are not weathermen, but we basically could be, George, with our picks last year, how wrong they were and how wrong the weathermen usually are. Our percentages match up in terms of correctly predicting what's going to happen. But looking at these right now, 92% chance of rain on Saturday, 81% chance of rain in Baltimore on Sunday. It looks to be a wet weekend in Maryland. If that's the case, I think Jonas is right, by the way. I think this is going to be one of those games where the rain could be a great equalizer, even though the Ravens have more talent. They are banged up, and the Colts are, again, for the most part, relatively healthy going into this game, especially in the areas that, matter in the trenches. For the most part, this should be a game where if it is wet and if it is one of those soggy games and throwing the ball is not ideal, this should be a game. I mean, call me crazy. Am I crazy here, George? Think the Colts have the advantage going into this game if it is going to be one of those wet and I was going to say wet and wild, wet and slippery sort of games here?
I don't know if I'd go as far as that they definitely have the advantage, but it evens things up. I mean, I think what Jonas said, it narrows that talent gap. And I think especially when you look at, like you were talking about, some of the Colts' strengths, that defensive line, that front seven in general, the way they're playing, you would think that the rain is going to be welcome to them. They got sort of that throwback. I mean, we need some photos now of like Franklin or Buckner or Stewart with the mud dripping off the helmet. They have that throwback feel to them right now. And I think that would definitely lean in their favor. And then, the comment that he made about not wanting to tackle Anthony Richardson in the rain, I don't think it's that much fun to try to tackle Anthony Richardson when it's not raining.
Agreed.
At Lucas Oil Stadium in climate controlled environment, it's not that much fun to try to tackle Anthony Richardson. But in the rain in particular, I mean, the only thing I can think of is, do you want, from a Colts perspective, do you want to go down to Nashville and tackle Derrick Henry in the rain? Probably not. So that, I think, I don't know how it can lessen, the gap. And also I wonder, one of the big advantages the Ravens have at home, and one of the reasons that the Ravens are so tough for rookie quarterbacks to play when they're at home is that crowd. It gets incredibly loud there. Michael Pittman was talking about it this week because obviously he was there for that primetime game. The atmosphere in general is a little crazy there. The strobe lights before the game. They won't now because it's not a primetime game, but I guess it gets dark enough with the rain that, it could be an advantage for them to do that. But, that crowd, the energy that they bring, the way that the team feeds off of that, maybe the rain lessens that a little bit too. People generally aren't quite as rowdy, when it's raining. I don't know. It could even be a factor there. Certainly what you talked about at the top of this segment would be, though. I think this is another reason for the Colts to come with their own energy and their own fast start, because the better they play early, the better chance they have of taking the crowd out of the game. And I think that's a critical factor here as well.
You're right, too. Soggy conditions, not ideal tailgating conditions. So maybe the crowd's a little less lubed up, a little less rowdy to start the game. And like you said, too, you start that's another area to open up and kind of take the air out of the stadium right away with a nice drive, either getting a 3 out defensively or getting a good drive and a scoring drive on offense to start the game. They could really get themselves in this game within the first 5 or 10 minutes of the first quarter and really kind of plant their flag. And frankly, George, they should. Whether they win the game or not, we'll give you our predictions here in a little bit. It's a different story, but I think it'd be a disappointment, George, if they are not out to a fast start in this first quarter.
That's got to be the goal coming in. I mean, so far Shane Steichen has shown a good job getting this team ready to go right out of the gate. They've looked good against both Jacksonville and Houston early. This is going to be another real difficult test, and we've talked several times before that schedule as a whole is not that daunting. There are definitely worse schedules across the NFL than the one the Colts face now, but a lot of the tough games for this team come early. And this is, I think, one of the toughest ones, at least on paper, because of how tough Baltimore can be of a road opponent, because of the fact that they're 2-0 now, that they're coming off a big win, and it's just imperative that Steichen continues his early trend here of having this team hyped up and ready to go. Probably even more so if Minshew is the quarterback. Because I think, Richardson's going to be able to do things throughout the game. Minshew is a guy that I think is going to need to get in that rhythm, to get in that flow. And obviously that's easier to do if you start that way than if you try to pick it up, in the middle of the game.
And like you said, too, through 2 games, Steichen's done a great job of getting this team off to a good start and getting things rolling. So especially with Minshew, I think you're right about that. I think regardless of the quarterback, you should expect a fast start. But especially if it's Minshew having a little bit more of a veteran presence, you can easily script the game plan to, again, fit his strengths, make some easy throws, whether the weather's good or not, and rely on your offensive line early against a banged-up defensive line and really, especially banged-up secondary against Baltimore here to get off to a good start and put your team in favorable situations. We know, especially last year, that was an area Frank Reich struggled in to start games where they were really slow out of the gate. So far, like I said, it's been a good start so far offensively. This team starting, the finishing has been a little bit of a different story, though. Again, last week we kind of talked about score, time and score kind of dictated that fourth quarter in Houston more than just, anything else. But yeah, if you're the Colts, George, this should be a game where you definitely start off fast and hopefully we could see a little bit better performance in the fourth quarter than we did. One other note here that it's interesting because, again, we've talked about the last game they played against the Ravens. We've seen, obviously, Lamar Jackson a ton, winning the MVP, being one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL. There is an offensive change, and we just heard Jonas talk about before, the Ravens are trying to make Lamar Jackson more of a pocket passer. Maybe that changes, George, with the weather, and maybe if it's a wet and windy day, maybe then they just resort to, one game will run him more and make him look like the old Lamar Jackson compared to being more of a pocket passer. But no J.K. Dobbins, right? They're top running back, out for the year with an Achilles injury. It looks like also their other starting running back. Oh boy, now I'm blanking. 43. Holy cow. Went to Oklahoma State. This is terrible. Justice Hill. I was gonna say it's gonna come to me eventually. Justice Hill did not practice on Wednesday, so it does not look like he could play. So your top 2 running backs could be out of the game in a wet game on Sunday, George. This should be, even if Lamar Jackson is running a little bit more, still an offense that should not, for Baltimore, that is, not be explosive and not hang a 40 spot like they did the last time these two teams met.
Yeah, and I think also, in Jackson's case, his running ability, a lot of it's speed based. He's not a big guy. He's not a power guy. When he gets out and really gashes teams, it's with that elite speed. And you would think a wet track, a muddy track would again favor the Colts in that environment. So, we'll see how it works out, because all those things we just said, the last time they played, the Colts had a huge lead in the third quarter. You would think that would favor the Colts as well, and it turned in a hurry. And you feel like Baltimore is always hostile for every visitor, especially so for the Colts. I know it's been 40 years since the team moved. It doesn't matter. That crowd still absolutely despises the Colts. For the longest time, they wouldn't put Indianapolis on the scoreboard there. That's changed the last couple of years. But it's, it's a real, I don't know if the players feel that way anymore. I mean, obviously none of them were around for this. The coaching staff, it's been 40 years. Nobody is really got that connection anymore, but the city feels it. And I think that energy definitely hovers over. I've only been there once for a Colts-Ravens battle, and it was 2017, late in the year, when obviously the Colts were struggling mightily that season. But even then, the game was close, and you could tell, even in a season where the Colts were not competitive overall, those fans were out for blood.
As Deion Sanders famously says, it's personal. It's personal, George, with those fans.
That fan base, absolutely personal.
Oh, all right. So we got weather involved. We got injuries involved. We got a quarterback question involved as well, George. With all that said, it's interesting. So we were texting back and forth Sunday after the podcast, and you texted me right away when the betting lines came out. Ravens -8. We was like, oh, that makes sense, Now, all of a sudden, as we're sitting here Thursday morning, that's a half point. Don't get me wrong. It's not a drastic line change. But now it's Ravens -7.5. As we get to our game picks, George, and as we look to continue the win streak and continue to stay perfect, you are 2-0. I am 2-0. You look at just before you even give our picks, George, are you surprised, though, that this line, I guess, is trending, even with the Colts quarterback right now uncertain? Are you surprised that, again, it's a half point, don't get me wrong, so it's not a big, drastic change, but are you surprised this line is trending down and not going the other way in the Ravens' favor with, again, Anthony Richardson's status and obviously missing practice, at least on Wednesday, his status up in the air?
Yeah, I think the natural feeling would be that it would start moving towards the Ravens if Richardson doesn't look like he's going to go. And obviously the early sign here was not good this week. We'll see how that plays out. We talked about that in the opening. There's still a lot there to do. But I think it does surprise me. But I also wonder how much this has to do with, those numbers that Jonas threw out there, 2 and 15 for rookie quarterbacks here. Maybe the half point is the idea that you don't have a rookie quarterback going to Baltimore. Maybe you're better off in the eyes of the bookies.
The Minshew effect. You know what?
Maybe.
If I'm Chris Ballard and the Jets come calling for Gardner Minshew, I say, you know what? Hey, look, this guy is changing lines in Vegas. I want another, that's another round higher in draft capital. If they're saying a 4th round pick, well, now he's at least a half point difference. Make it a 3rd round pick. The Minshew effect there, George. Jack up the price if they do come calling. Which, hey, this is a big game for him. He plays well. You can get a first round. Colts can get a first round pick for him. Why not 2?
Rebuild the Colts right now. Minshew to the Jets for Sauce Gardner. Jonathan Taylor to the Browns for Myles Garrett. And then you just book the Super Bowl trip. Off you go.
I think if you were the GM, a statue would be built outside Lucas Oil Stadium before the next home game. If you make those 2 trades tomorrow.
There would also be an NFL investigation into what exactly went into these moves.
Hey, whatever it takes. Whatever it takes, George. Whatever it takes to get a nice bronze statue in the heart of the city. I think that would be well worth it.
There was a ton of misinformation on social media yesterday concerning the Bears. But if those two trades happen, there might actually be FBI raids at the Browns and Jets facilities to figure out what went on there.
Or maybe your house, if you're the one executing the trades. What are you offering that these two teams could not say no to?
I don't even know what I have. That would be really interesting. What could I possibly give those two teams to make those deals happen?
I mean, they're fair deals to me. If Gardner Minshew going to Baltimore and win, like,
that's true.
Wouldn't you rather have an elite quarterback on your team versus an elite corner? I would take that every day.
Clearly.
And for the Browns, you rather have an elite running back than an elite defensive end.
Yeah,
on paper, like nothing fishy here.
Logic dictates these moves. They need to happen.
Nothing more than just some good old football logic as to why both the Jets and Browns would say yes to these hypothetical trades. But all right, George, we are joking, but seriously, hey, look, if Gardner Minshew plays well, that trade stock could go up. Are we predicting a big effort here from Indy? 7.5-point dogs. The Colts are going to Baltimore here. The official 2-0, soon to be 3-0. George, Bremer prediction is?
I'm going to say the Colts cover, but don't win. I'm going to go 21-17 Baltimore. I think it's going to be a sloppy game. Looks that way right now. You know, that it's going to be a sloppy game. But I think in the end, similar to what we saw in week 1 with Jacksonville, I think the Ravens experience will win out.
We were on the same page a lot last year. That was a bad thing. We've been on the same page so far this year. That's been a good thing. If it ain't broke, George, don't fix it. I'm with you in the sense that I think the Ravens do win this game, but the Colts do cover. You're saying 21-17. I'm going to even go a little bit lower scoring. I'm going to go 17-13. 17-13, Ravens win, but the Colts do make it a game. I think the weather is going to be a great equalizer like we've been talking about, where the rain, slippery, wet conditions do favor the Colts and do give them a little bit more of an advantage. I do think the injuries right now for Baltimore are starting to add up. 2 offensive linemen missing for them. Secondary is a mash unit completely. And so, you know, we talked about last week with the Texans offensive line. It's a who's who of who the hell is playing. Same thing right now with the Ravens secondary. Rocky Yassin is back. That should be a little bit fun to see an old friend back on the field. But whether it is Minshew, whether it is Richardson, this still should be a game where the Colts should be in it without a doubt. I think a fast start will happen for this team coming out of the gates. But in the end, like I said, I think the Ravens are a very well-coached team. I don't think the hangover will last the entire game. Even the Colts got out to a good start. I think, you know, the Ravens will kind of come to, maybe get a little smelling salts in the locker room, wake up after halftime. But sloppy game where not a lot of offense is going to be had. 17-13, I think the Ravens do win, but the Colts do cover, and still, at least in a season where wins and losses don't matter, George, still continue to be competitive and still continue to be entertaining in this game, and do make it a close and more of a slobber knocker sort of game here in Baltimore. So we're both on the Colts to cover, both on the Ravens to win, and both have a little bit more of a lower scoring, grinded out sort of game. Should be interesting. Should be a very interesting and fun game, George, to say the least. But with that said, appreciate you joining us right here on the Blue Horseshoe Podcast. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube. That's where you could find George and I after the game on Sunday, reacting to everything from that Week 3 matchup here. A post-game exclusive on YouTube is what we've been doing. We will be doing every single game this season. Live after the game, George is not going to be in Baltimore, which means game ends, 15 minutes later, boom, we're on your phone, we're on your laptop, we're on your tablet, or on your smart TV if you really want to blow us up and look at us in your living room. So subscribe, you'll get the alert. Right after the game is over, we will be live breaking it all down. Very excited for it. Have a great weekend. We'll talk to you Sunday after the game right here on the Blue Horseshoe Podcast.